10 Worst Sleeper Cars of the 1970s. The 1970s gave us some incredible performance icons, but it also gave us plenty of cars that looked fast, sounded promising, and turned out painfully slow. These are the cars that wore sporty badges and muscle car styling, but had the performance of a tired lawnmower. Today, we're counting down the 10 worst sleeper cars of the 1970s, the ones that fooled everyone, including their owners. 10. Chevrolet Vega GT, 1971 to 1977. The Chevrolet Vega GT is a perfect example of 1970s optimism meeting engineering disaster. When Chevy launched the Vega, it was meant to be the future. Small, efficient, stylish, and sporty. The GT trim looked like a performance coupe straight out of a muscle car lineup, with bold stripes, rally wheels, and a sleek fastback profile. On the surface, it had all the signs of a proper little racer, but under the hood, that's where things fell apart. The Vega GT was powered by a 2.3-liter aluminum inline-4 engine that made just over 100 horsepower, and even that figure was generous. The idea of an all-aluminum engine sounded advanced at the time, but in practice it was a disaster. The blocks warped, cylinder walls wore out prematurely, and oil consumption became so bad that owners often carried extra quarts in the trunk. If the car didn't overheat, it was probably leaking something. Even when it was running properly, the Vega GT's performance was underwhelming. The acceleration was sluggish, the 4-speed manual felt clunky, and handling wasn't nearly as sporty as the look suggested. Chevy marketed it as a competitor to nimble imports like the Datsun 510, but those cars ran circles around it in every way, from build quality to reliability to actual fun. By the mid-1970s, the Vega's reputation had completely collapsed. Rust issues, recalls, and poor reliability made it one of the most infamous failures in GM's history. It looked like a baby Camaro, but it drove like an exhausted economy car that had already given up. The Vega GT promised the excitement of a performance coupe, but instead it became the poster child for how not to build a sporty compact. A true sleeper, but only because it put everyone around it to sleep. 9. Ford Mustang II, 1974. The name Mustang once stood for power, freedom, and classic American performance. But in 1974, Ford decided to reinvent it for a new era, and the result was the Mustang II, a car that looked like a Mustang but drove like a Pinto in disguise. In fact, it was built on the Pinto platform. The timing couldn't have been worse. The 1973 oil crisis had just shaken up the market, and Ford believed people wanted smaller, more efficient cars. So they took the legendary muscle car, shrunk it down, and gave it a new image. Lighter, thriftier, and supposedly refined. The problem was they also took away the power and spirit that made the Mustang special in the first place. At launch, the base engine was a 2.3-liter 4-cylinder, making a depressing 88 horsepower. Even the optional 2.8-liter V6 struggled to hit 105 horsepower. To make matters worse, Ford had the audacity to bring back the Cobra II and King Cobra trims, complete with racing stripes, spoilers, and scoops. That looked every bit like serious muscle cars. But under the hood, there was nothing but disappointment. The Mustang II wasn't just slow, it was dull. The steering felt vague. The suspension was soft, and the automatic transmissions robbed what little power the engine had. It might have been good for fuel economy, but it completely betrayed the performance heritage of the nameplate. To Ford's credit, the Mustang II sold fairly well because of the gas crisis and changing regulations. But among enthusiasts, it became a punchline. It's often called the worst Mustang ever built, and for good reason. It pretended to be a pony car, yet couldn't even outrun some economy sedans of its time. The Mustang II might have looked sporty with its aggressive stripes and fastback shape, but once you hit the gas, the illusion fell apart. It was a car that promised performance and delivered a public apology instead. 8. Chevrolet Monza 2+2, 1975-1980. When Chevrolet introduced the Monza 2+2, they wanted to create a sleek, affordable sports coupe that could carry on the Camaro's performance legacy in a smaller, more efficient package. On paper, it looked promising. Low, aerodynamic, and sharp. In reality, it became one of the most misleading cars of the 1970s. The Monza looked fast standing still. Its design was inspired by European Grand Tours, and Chevy even claimed it was engineered for driving excitement. The early prototypes were supposed to feature a rotary Wankel engine, but emissions and reliability issues killed that plan before production. Instead, Chevy stuffed in a 2.3-liter inline-4 that produced a miserable 78 horsepower. That's right, a car that looked like a Ferrari clone had power numbers closer to a lawnmower. Later models offered a 305 cubic inch 5-liter V8, which sounded exciting until you realized it only made 140 horsepower thanks to strict emissions controls and low compression. Even then, the Monza weighed too much to feel quick. 0 to 60 miles per hour took over 10 seconds, and the handling didn't make up for it. The suspension was soft, the steering felt vague, and the brakes were easily overwhelmed. The irony was painful. This was a car that looked like a muscle coupe, but drove like a tired economy car. Chevy even offered sporty trims and flashy decals, trying to convince buyers that it was a performance machine. But once you got behind the wheel, you realized the Monza's bark was much louder than its bite. The worst part? The car was plagued by quality issues. Owners complained about rust, electrical faults, and poorly fitted interiors. It might have been stylish, but under the surface, it was rushed, compromised, and underpowered, a victim of GM's confusion during the emissions era. The Monza 2+2 tried to capture the excitement of American performance in a fuel-conscious decade, but it ended up being a poser. It had all the right looks, sleek body, sporty badges, and muscle car attitude, yet none of the muscle to back it up. 7. Ford Mustang II Cobra II, 1976. The name Mustang once meant raw American power, a symbol of freedom and performance. But in the mid-70s, that symbol took a rough turn. The Mustang II Cobra II looked aggressive, wore racing stripes, and even carried the legendary Cobra badge. On the surface, it screamed performance. But under the hood, it was one of the biggest disappointments of the decade. The Cobra II had the looks nailed. Hood scoops, spoilers, and sporty graphics that made it seem ready to dominate the streets. But once you fired it up, the illusion vanished. The base engine was a 2.3-liter inline-4, making just 88 horsepower. Even the performance option, a 302 cubic inch 5-liter V8, barely produced 139 horsepower. By comparison, the original 65 Mustang GT had more power a decade earlier. 0 to 60 miles per hour, around 10 to 11 seconds. That's hardly what you'd expect from something wearing Cobra stripes. The suspension was soft, the steering felt loose, and the braking performance was mediocre at best. It looked like a racer, but drove like a commuter car with fancy paint. To make things worse, the emissions and fuel crisis had forced Ford to compromise heavily. The result was a Mustang that cared more about efficiency than excitement. Buyers were lured in by its looks and left disappointed when they realized the bite didn't match the bark. Still, the Cobra II has a strange cult following today. Some enthusiasts appreciate its nostalgic 70s charm and disco-era design. But let's be real, as a performance car, it was a letdown. It had the stripes, the attitude, and the legendary name, but not the muscle. The Mustang II Cobra II was proof that not every fast-looking car lives up to its image. It looked like a hero, but drove like a compromise. 6. Chevrolet Monza Spider, 1975. At first glance, the Chevrolet Monza Spider looked like a true 70s sports coupe. It had a low-slung body, flared fenders, and a name that suggested European flair. With Spider plastered across the body and badges, buyers expected something light, quick, and agile. Maybe a cheaper American answer to an Alfa or Porsche. But what they got was something very different. Under that sporty exterior lived a collection of engines that struggled to match the Monza's looks. The base model came with a 2.3-liter inline-4, barely pushing 87 horsepower. Even the optional 5-liter V8 couldn't save it. Emissions controls choked it down to just 140 horsepower. It made all the right noises on paper, but in practice it felt slow, heavy, and confused about what it wanted to be. The handling didn't help either. Despite being based on the Vega platform, the Monza carried extra weight thanks to poor design and unnecessary complexity. Its steering was vague, the ride was soft, and it didn't have the tight, connected feel that sporty drivers wanted. You could get it with flashy decals, a shaker hood, and alloy wheels, but none of that translated into excitement on the road. Chevrolet marketed the Monza as a driver's car, something that could handle curves and deliver thrills. But behind the wheel, it felt more like a showpiece than a sports machine. The powertrain lacked urgency, the brakes faded quickly, and the gearbox was far from precise. It looked ready for a backroad blast, but reality hit as soon as you floored the pedal. The Monza Spider became a perfect example of the 1970s performance slump. A car that wanted to look fast without actually being fast. It was a time when style mattered more than substance, and the Monza wore that truth proudly. Today, it's remembered as a curious misstep, a sporty name, a bold design, and a disappointing drive. The Monza Spider promised excitement, but in the end, it just looked the part. 5. Oldsmobile Cutlass, 442-1973. The Oldsmobile Cutlass 442 in the mid-1970s is a tragic case study in performance decline, wearing a legendary badge while delivering shockingly meek power. The 442 name once stood for pure muscle and tire-shredding torque. But by 1973, when the car moved to the huge, newly redesigned A-body colonnade platform, it became a bloated caricature of its former self. The problem wasn't the car's presence. The Cutlass was enormous, stylish, and often came with aggressive features like massive hood scoops and a subtle wing. But the engine it contained, the combination of its massive size and weight paired with emissions-choked engines, turned this former muscle car hero into a slow, lazy cruiser. Psy buyers were lured by the aggressive looks and the powerful heritage of the 442 name, only to find that the once mighty engine was breathing through restrictive catalytic converters and low-compression heads, resulting in performance that felt apologetic compared to its 1960s ancestors. The engine was the 5-liter Rocket V8, or the later 6-liter V8 option, which was severely detuned to meet new federal emission standards. The 6-liter V8, which once produced nearly 350 horsepower, was choked down to a dismal 180 horsepower and 320 pound-feet of torque in 1973 trim, and the smaller engines fared even worse. The Cutlass was a truly heavy machine, with a curb weight of around 1,720 kilograms. The steel body-on-frame chassis, while durable, was optimized for ride comfort and luxury, not performance handling. The 442 of this era was slow, taking over 10 seconds to reach 60 miles per hour in some configurations, a figure completely unbecoming of its muscle car heritage. The steering was numb and the suspension was soft, meaning this car made no apologies for trading excitement for comfort. The 442 simply retained the visual aggression of its past without any of the necessary muscle to back it up, fooling a generation of drivers who expected muscle car performance. That heavy muscle car was choked. Now for the sleek personal luxury coupe that was all swagger and no speed. 4. Pontiac Grand Prix SJ, 1973. The Pontiac Grand Prix SJ was the epitome of 1970s extravagance, designed to make a massive visual statement while secretly hiding painfully mediocre performance. This colossal personal luxury coupe was instantly recognizable by its impossibly long hood, sculpted body lines, and vertical bar V-nose grille. The SJ package, which included rally gauges, bucket seats, and a handling package, suggested this car was built for speed and precision. In reality, the Grand Prix became a lazy high-riding cruiser. Cy Pontiac wanted buyers to believe the SJ trim was a continuation of their high-performance legacy, but the massive bulk of the colonnade body, combined with the power sapped by strict emission controls, meant this handsome coupe performed like a land yacht, slowly wallowing its way down the highway. The standard performance engine for the SJ was the famous Pontiac 6-liter V8, 400 cubic inches, or the massive Pontiac 7-liter V8, 455 cubic inches, the latter of which was eliminated entirely by 1977. The once potent 6-liter V8 produced a mere 180 horsepower and 330 pound-feet of torque in its mid-70s guise. The Grand Prix was gigantic, contributing to a substantial curb weight of around 1,750 kilograms. The steel body-on-frame chassis prioritized a smooth ride above all else, making the handling soft and steering numb. Even with the optional 7-liter V8 in the earlier 1973 model, the car still took over 9 seconds to reach 60 miles per hour, a pathetic performance for a vehicle of this visual aggression. The Grand Prix SJ was the ultimate performance illusion, a beautifully designed car that delivered luxury and style, but betrayed the performance promise of its own namesake. That luxury yacht was too lazy. Now let's look at the bold, sloping coupe that was all attitude and no engine development. 3. AMC Matador X, 1974. The AMC Matador X is perhaps the strangest-looking car on this list, famous for its dramatic, unconventional styling, penned by Dick Teague, and its complete lack of performance substance. The Matador coupe was daringly aerodynamic, featuring deeply tunneled headlamps and a brutally fast, sloping roofline, A design so polarizing, it was used in the James Bond movie, The Man with the Golden Gun. The X package added rally side stripes, slotted-style wheels, and a blacked-out grille, all screaming that this was AMC's high-performance champion. In reality, the Matador X was structurally awkward and underpowered. AMC cobbled the car together using parts sourced from other Detroit rivals, and the handling suffered greatly, giving the car massive body roll that road testers called excessive during cornering. The engine was the AMC 5-liter V8, 304 cubic inches, or the optional 6-liter V8, 360 cubic inches. The 5-liter V8, standard on the X model, produced a dismal 150 horsepower and 245 pound-feet of torque. The Matador was a heavy midsize car with a curb weight of around 1,678 kilograms. The steel unibody chassis was notoriously flexible, and its archaic rear suspension used a cumbersome 4-link trailing arm design. Even when fitted with the most powerful 401 V8 option, the Matador X could do no better than 16.3 seconds in the quarter mile, proving its speed did not match its flamboyant style. The Matador X promised a futuristic, bold performance image, but delivered a lazy, compromised driving experience that was long on style and painfully short on muscle. That strange coupe was structurally weak. Now let's look at the classic muscle car that turned into an emissions-choked pony. 2. Dodge Challenger 1973. The Dodge Challenger of 1973 and 1974 is the single most painful reminder of the muscle car's fall from grace in the 1970s. This car carried the iconic design and legacy of the brutal Hemi and six-pack era, but by its final years, it was a shadow of its former self, completely neutered by emission regulations. It still had the long hood, wide stance, and aggressive profile of a proper E-body Mopar pony car, fooling buyers into thinking they were getting a taste of the old-school fury. The truth was that all the powerful engines were gone, replaced by emissions-choked V8s that couldn't muster half the power of their ancestors. This extreme betrayal of the nameplate is why the late first-generation Challenger is such a notorious sleeper failure. It looked like a Titan but performed like a tourist. The biggest engine remaining was the 5-liter V8, 318 cubic inches, or the available 5-liter V8, 360 cubic inches. The 5-liter V8 made a mere 150 horsepower, and even the largest 5-liter V8 could only produce 245 horsepower, a fraction of the 425 horsepower the Hemi produced just a few years earlier. The Challenger was still a large coupe, with a curb weight of around 1,650 kilograms. The steel unibody chassis was designed to handle 400-plus horsepower, making the actual output feel even more sluggish due to the car's size. The 360-powered Challenger took over 9 seconds to reach 60 miles per hour, a performance number that was embarrassing for a car wearing the aggressive Challenger badge. The late Challenger was a victim of its own heritage, promising fire and delivering nothing but smoke and disappointment. You've seen the muscle car turn commuter. Now for the final car of this list, the British disaster that was beautiful but mechanically cursed. Hit that like button, subscribe for more automotive deep dives, and stick around, because the next one might be the most confusing sports car ever made. 1. Triumph Stag, 1970-1977. The Triumph Stag had all the right ingredients to be a hit: British charm, a sleek design, and a badge that carried real sports car heritage. It looked like the perfect European Grand Tourer, something that could take on the Mercedes SL or the Jaguar XJS. But under the hood and behind the wheel, things went very wrong, very fast. Triumph built the Stag around an ambitious idea: a luxurious 2+2 convertible powered by an all-new 3-liter V8 engine. On paper, that sounded exciting. Finally, a British-built coupe with muscle to match its looks. Unfortunately, the engine was a disaster. It was underdeveloped, prone to overheating, and notorious for blowing head gaskets. Poor cooling system design and sloppy assembly meant many engines failed before even hitting 50,000 miles. To make matters worse, Triumph didn't have the resources to properly fix these problems. Instead, dealers kept sending customers back out with patchwork repairs and a drive carefully warning. That's not what you want to hear after buying a so-called Grand Tour. The Stag's reputation collapsed almost immediately, especially in export markets like the US, where reliability mattered most. Performance wasn't much better. Despite its V8 badge, it only produced 145 horsepower, and the car weighed nearly 1,400 kilograms. That meant a sluggish 0 to 60 miles per hour time of 9.5 seconds, which might not sound terrible for the era, but it was nowhere near what its design promised. Combine that with a lazy automatic transmission and soft suspension, and the Stag felt more cruiser than bruiser. And yet, it looked incredible. The low stance, chrome accents, and that signature T-bar roof made it one of the prettiest cars of the 1970s. It just didn't drive like one. You could park it next to a Ferrari, and it wouldn't look out of place. But fire up the engine and you'd hear disappointment in surround sound. The Triumph Stag became a cautionary tale, a car that showed how overambition without proper engineering can sink even the best-looking design. A true sleeper failure of the 70s, beautiful on the outside and heartbreak on the inside. And that wraps up our list of the 10 worst sleeper cars of the 1970s. Machines that looked fast, fierce, and full of promise, but left drivers wishing for a lot more. If you enjoyed the ride, hit that like button, subscribe for more automotive stories, and stay tuned. Next time, we're taking a look at the hidden legends that actually delivered.